Gone are the days where it used to be about flying to scene, picking the patient up and then taking to hospital. Now we take hospital to the patient.
Welcome to Being Crisis Prepared, Inverroy Crisis Management's podcast about all things resilience. I'm Sarah Batts, a crisis and continuity consultant, and I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Kirsty Bremner, also a crisis continuity consultant. In this episode, we have a special guest to talk about all things resilience from a perspective of critical care roles. And please do welcome Stephen Mason, our guest from Midlands Air Ambulance Charity, who is one of their critical care paramedics.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Mason. I'm a critical care paramedic for Midlands Air Ambulance Charity. I have been with Midlands Air Ambulance Charity since 2014.
Thanks, Steve. So I think for our listeners from our perspective as well, we'd love to hear a bit more about how your role works and sort of a typical day in the life. So for those who may not be familiar with the Air Ambulance Charity and how they work, could you describe for us sort of what a typical day looks like within your role as a critical care paramedic for us, please?
So within our charity area, we have 3 aircraft covering 6 counties. So we are the largest air ambulance in the UK to cover the most geographical area. It equates to about 6,000 square miles, and we cover communities like Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, Shropshire, Staffordshire, Worcestershire and the West Midlands. Now, we do go across borders, so sometimes we are called out to assist other air ambulance services neighbouring us, so we'll go over to Warwickshire or to the northwest. I think we cover the population of approximately about 7 million people. We turn up for a shift and there's all relevant checks that we have to do before the aircraft comes online. So it normally takes about half an hour to do all these checks, and then we'll call up to the local ambulance service and make ourselves available for any taskings.
I never even considered 7 million people. That is a lot of, and the area that you mentioned, that's a huge area to cover and many people. Just what's the difference? Is there a mega difference between kind of the ground-based paramedic role and your role in critical care aviation?
Yeah, so we work in partnership with the local ambulance service, supporting patients to take them to the most appropriate hospital. And that's probably one of the reasons why I got into this job. So I have been in pre-hospital care for about 20 years now. I was a paramedic on the road. I started going out to critically ill and injured patients where my paramedic care was treated them to the best I could do, but I know that I could not provide that extra care which they needed. And so frequently I had to call out enhanced care teams to help support that patient all the way to hospital. So that gave me the bug to sort of better myself for the patients. So I joined Midlands Ambulance Charity in 2014 and then qualified as a CCP 2017 and was fortunate enough to get a substantive role. And now that's where I work. So, there are certain patients where we need to go to them to provide some critical sort of interventions to support them before we take them to hospital. Gone are the days where it used to be about flying to scene, picking the patient up, bringing them on to the air ambulance and then taking them to hospital. Now we take hospital to the patient. We can do more or less what the emergency departments at A&E do. So we go out, stabilise the patient as best we can, and then find the best possible way of getting to hospital for that patient. So it's about just getting the team to the patient side, to the roadside. Sometimes it's probably time efficient to take the patient to hospital by land. So we use the local ambulance service to help us convey the patient to the nearest appropriate hospital. But there's certain critical interventions that we need to do to the patient. So, we can perform a pre-hospital emergency anaesthesia. So basically take over their breathing, take over their ventilations, making sure that, we're looking after them for that onward journey to hospital.
That's so much to be able to provide that level of care. I think from an air ambulance perspective as well, and that could be in sort of any environment and quite remote environments too. Those checks you mentioned beforehand, where you spend, half an hour prepping and sorting all your kit to make sure you have everything in order. I mean, that's very similar to our world as well in resilience and prepping for emergency response crews and our incident management teams, etc., to make sure that they also have the right kit as well. So it's good. Yeah, the similarities there are strong. So, I mean, you talk there about teamwork. So it's not just obviously yourself doing this role. You have a team of people with you as well. How do you all sort of get in the zone almost before a shift? Because obviously these can be quite challenging environments, and obviously I think each shift probably brings something different, I'm presuming. So how do you prepare yourself physically for this role and your team?
I think within MAC we've got a good team ethos, and that's organisational wide. That's from the charity members and staff that do all the fundraising, getting all the sponsorship, to the clinical team, which is our pilots and CCPs and doctors. So we're all there, one thing, to make patients' treatment and patients' outcome a lot better than, just a lot better, really. Do you know what I mean? The charity team do a fantastic job. So, and without them, we wouldn't be able to sort of operate. We go out to about 12 missions a day, and they need to raise in excess of about £16 million a year to keep all 3 aircraft and the 2 cars operational.
Yeah.
I think every time an air ambulance mission goes out, it's just short of £3,000 on average. And then when a car goes out, it's probably just under £300. The difference between the car and the helicopters, we carry the same kit on each sort of platform. The thing that stops us flying really is mist and fog. So if, in the winter months, if the weather is inclement, then we'll still respond to that patient on the car with all the right equipment. So we've got a good close bond. We regularly train together. There's always things to keep us active, to make sure that we're always providing the best standard of patient care to that patient. And we all work as one, as a team. So we've got a good team ethos throughout the whole of our organisation, especially on the charity side.
I think that's really good to hear, actually, the team ethos, and that's something we definitely found increased as Inverroy were doing their kind of physical challenge of the 10,000 kilometres. I would probably say, like, you're working in, and I can only imagine, like, a really physically intense environment, like moving patients, working in tough terrain and like wearing heavy kit. You mentioned that you can train all together, and you go, I think I heard it correctly, was it 12 times on the shift? What's the impact of like fatigue on the performance? Is it that there's one team and you go out on every single trip or call out, or do you kind of swap it over within the team? Like, how does that work for like sleep deprivation or fatigue, on like mental and physical resilience?
Yeah, so we have 3 resources on 3 platforms throughout the day. So at Strensham, our operational hours are from 7 till 7. RAF Cosford, AVHQ, there's another aircraft that starts at 7 to 7, and that can be a makeup of a double CCP or a doctor and a CCP. And then we've got our late aircraft, which currently is taking part in daylight tracking. So they are currently doing a 10-10 shift. And obviously when the weather gets a little bit darker, we go down to 9-9 and then 8-8. And that just allows us to reach more patients in the lighter months. So it just depends where the job is, really. So if there was the call in North Gloucestershire area, then the Strensham crew would go down and we'd go and do that job, treat that patient, take him to hospital, go back, re-kit, repack, do paperwork and make ourselves available for the next job. It is quite demanding, sometimes we have to carry heavy bits of equipment to the patient, especially if it's in a rural area. Once we get to the patient, treat them, pack them back onto the aircraft or the ambulance and take them to hospital. So it can be quite arduous and tiring, but we sort of all keep ourselves as fit as we can do, and we've all got this healthy sort of
mindset, like a healthy mindset.
healthy mindset. So we all like our breakfast, but we try and make it as healthy as possible. But it's all about looking after yourself, because it will get tiring. What I personally sort of struggle with, so our shift work, we do 2 days, 2 nights, and then 5 off. And then we have bits of relief within that rota to cover training, to cover annual leave. I personally, and some people don't, I personally struggle with nights because it's the swapping and changing between days and nights. But to counteract that, if you keep yourself fit, if you keep yourself hydrated, if you keep yourself well nourished, then the fatigue sort of element is not as pronounced. I know the older you get, the harder it gets as well. And we also got a 11-hour rule within MAC. So if I were to finish late, I would not come in for my next shift if I was on shift the next day until 11 hours later. So, for example, if I was on the 7/7 shift and I finished at 10 o'clock in the evening, then I wouldn't come back in until 9 o'clock the next morning. So that gives a bit of resilience to make sure that you can get home, you can get fed, you can get rested before turning up to base for your next shift.
And I think that was one of the really big questions that Kirsty and I had discussed before, is like the recovery of quite back-to-back intense call-outs. And you're saying, like, if you're 2 days and then 2 nights and then 5 days, but you're actually still training during that time, it's good to hear that they've got rules set in place for proper recovery and kind of safeguarding of individuals that go out on these call-outs. That's actually really good to hear.
Yeah, that is important, because, you know, everyone wants to go out and help patients, and if they've got that rule there, I mean, that will just make sure that, you know, you look after yourself. But ultimately, if you finish the shift at 6 hours before your next shift and you go in, ultimately the patient can be harmed, and none of us want to do that. So they've got that safety mechanism, for want of a better word, in there, just to make sure that, you know, if people do look after yourself, you know, you don't increase the risk of harm to any patients or yourselves.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, it's not making sure that you, as the caregiver, don't become like a casualty yourself as well. And again, that's something as well that with our work, we always try to reiterate, whether that's, you know, physical care of yourself or just general, you know, making sure you're wearing kit correctly. It's, you know, you can't help anyone else until you yourself are ready to go and are prepped for that. So no, that's really interesting, actually, Stephen.
Yeah, that's one of the first principles of first aid. The first principle is don't become a casualty yourself. So, and that can stem from a lot. You know, you can make that into as big or as little as you want, but that's the most important thing, really.
100%. And I think off the back of the physical stuff, part of our challenge as well, our charity challenge that we were doing earlier this year, to help support and raise money for the Air Ambulances UK, was the mental resilience piece as well. So I think for us, running an activity after work is often quite a good sort of mental release, and especially helps mine when I've, you know, finished work and my brain's a bit like soup. Going out for a run always helps that. So and I think the emphasis on mental strength is something that I really shouldn't be overlooked. I mean, you mentioned before your previous career as a paramedic on the ground, 20 years, I think, plus, something like that. So a long time and a lot of experience in that area. You know, is there any sort of strategies or tools that you maybe do with the emotional weight of your work? Because you're dealing with quite a lot of critically injured patients, which for the layperson would, you know, is probably quite distressing. I know I can't do blood, so that's what would do, you know, me out. So I know there's obviously a mental aspect to your role as well. Could you talk us through that maybe as well?
Yeah, I think when people get trained to be paramedics, you know, that training, that sort of preparing for what you can see, starts to get given to them at a very early age. So the normal roadside paramedic, they go out to deal with some sick patients, and then we go and support them. And it's, you know, I'm human. Things do affect me. Things do affect any other paramedic, and that's normal. That's a part of being human. But where I tend to, me personally, separate myself, I just go into work mode in my head, and so that allows me to separate myself from my emotions and deal with that job in the best way I can. And that extends, from my experience, my training, supporting colleagues, and basically reassuring the patient on seeing that, we are doing the best for them. And that tends to sort of just move me away from the emotional aspect of it. All paramedics and all critical care paramedics and doctors, they all care, but we've got that sort of ability to just sort of just move ourselves just to a different level, deal with the patient, take them to hospital, and once we get back, then we can sort of debrief it, discuss what we've done well, what could have been done a little bit better, and then to sort of look after each other for the next couple of days. Yeah.
And I think it's really important that you've mentioned about kind of the debriefing aspect. A lot of the times, like we've seen during our work, is during an incident or even just the training, everyone's really focused on the incident and really quite head down sometimes. And it's only when in the debriefing aspect, so like the hot debrief, which is directly after kind of the incident, we find that people actually open up, and it's quite a good peer support to actually say, no, I actually found that quite difficult, and I might need to work on this. Or that can be found in, like 72 hours afterwards, where it's more of a cold debrief and it's upon reflection. But it is a really good thing to do about, you said about the debriefing aspect, and actually see what could have been done better. How do you feel about this? And more of like the mental side it plays with, like the peer supporting peer. And I think Kirsty and I have seen that a lot I think that happens in most job roles as well, which is really, really good to see that that's a support mechanism that organisations are kind of carrying out.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most vital parts of the job for, ongoing learning and explaining what's gone on, and make sure that, although it's the local ambulance service or the police or the fire service or our colleagues, you're all part of the team, and you want to make sure that everyone is okay, to limit sort of possible errors or near misses. But at MAC at the moment, we've got a thing where we like to promote excellence as well. So that is for our colleagues, the general members of public that stop at scene, the fire service, the police, and we call that, MAC Live, which is learning independently from excellence. So if we like to promote excellence rather than always looking at on the negatives. So the way to improve, sometimes people improve by looking, oh, right, we could have done this better. Sort of hone on, oh, right, it was an error that caused us to look at this. Whereas if we look at excellence and promote that makes people feel a lot more better about themselves, be more optimistic, and probably has a more proactive approach. And going back to the debriefing side of things, sometimes if we get on scene and the ambulance service have been working flat out, and and they can't seem to be they've just been working flat out, really. And then we come in, big red flight suits, doing our interventions, and then whisk them off to hospital. It's always good to have that open forum at the end with the crew, open questions, and just explain what we did. And that's really good, really receptive from the crews, because they're able to fully understand what we've done, why we've done it. And within this, there's no silly questions. I'm always saying silly questions, but I think any question is pertinent, really. So I want to break down that barrier. Although we're in a red suit, break down that barrier. They can ask us questions. We'll give them answers why we did something or why we didn't do something. And we also like to see what our rapport with them is like, because it's learning for us as well. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to go into scene and be thrashing around and making that paramedic or that clinician feel uncomfortable, because again, we're all there for one thing, and that's to make the patient as safe and as better as we can before taking them to the hospital.
Definitely. Oh, well, look, thank you so much, Steve. I think that was really, really insightful, not just for Sarah and I, but I'm pretty sure also for our listeners.
And we'd just like to say thanks, Steve, for everything that you do, and Air Ambulance UK and Midlands Air Ambulance Charity for everything they do for everyone. And we're really, really appreciative. So thank you so much to you and the teams out there, and good luck.
Thank you first of all, for you for joining and taking part. We really, really appreciate it. And to our listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll see you hopefully on our next podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.